Boom, and we're live. Thanks everybody tuning in to another episode of Men with Purpose. Today I'm joined by Richard Joy. Richard is a men's work facilitator, a conscious creator, and the founder of Awakened Man. Awakened Man aims to drive men forward on the path of initiation, self-realization, spiritual unfoldment, and masculine wisdom to restore balance for themselves, their souls, and the world at large. Richard, thanks very much for joining, sir.
Pleasure to be here, Pav.
Normally, I start these podcasts with just an invitation to take a deep breath and just do a quick check-in, whatever is present for you right now. So let's take a deep breath, and I'll just invite you to share whatever is going on in your body through your head right now.
Well, I have to say, the thing that's most immediate is what an interesting way to start a podcast. It's very original. I very much like this idea. And I think with regards to what's present in me right now, I feel a very strong sense of growing and building purpose manifesting in my life. And there's uncertainty that comes with that. I think that's probably the most notable emotional line that's been running through me of late. Because when you open yourself to new pastures, comes the, well, what's here? What's around here? And what about if I go into this field? And what about if I go over here? You know? So a lot of that is definitely present within me right now. But I think I've come to, there's a lot of internal action going on when I feel that. Because my initial instinct, ever since a child, when I felt that fear, if you will, of the unknown, was to hide, to run away. You know, don't want to face that. And that got me in all kinds of mess in my life. So I've really learned the hard way that it's something I have to love, you know, it's something I have to trust within reason. You know, I don't believe that we should always be sort of at the red line pushing ourselves. I think we do need this kind of stretching and striving and then coming back and resting. So I think whenever I do check in and I feel that sense of, it's a mixture of purpose and excitement. And then this other voice inside, well, it's not even a voice, it's this energy, it's almost a spirit, you know, and it's saying, oh, I wonder what's over that hill. Is it safe over there? And there's ambivalence within me about it, but the feeling of I'm intrigued and I want to know more outweighs the fear these days, you know? And I think that's because of just time and time again saying to myself, let's go and find out. Let's stop living in the mind. Let's stop telling myself what reality is going to be and going to experience it myself. So that's predominantly what I'm feeling right now.
Thank you, sir. I'm checking in similar to you, really listening to you, and I'm also checking in with a lot of curiosity about yourself, your story, your purpose. Very much resonate with that. And I'm checking with a lot of gratitude as well for being able to do this. I always kind of say this on the podcast because that's genuinely how I feel. There's a mix between curiosity and gratitude that that's my key, right? We're live, let's go and do it. So very grateful for that. Tell me a little bit about your story. How did you kind of? I'm sure that's a long story. How did you get on this path in the first place? Maybe what was it like living, you know, outside of London, and you know, what was young Richard like?
Yes, it's a long story, so I'll give you the page notes version. You know, so I grew up in Leicester, which is smack bang in the middle of the country. It's very much a sort of a nice place where I was from, but the sort of place where not much really happens. You know, it's great until you hit about 14, and then you want to go out and see the world, but you feel like you're trapped, I suppose. And I was a relatively normal kid, you know, grew up in a kind of traditional family home. And when I got to about 11, my parents split up. And I really wasn't that affected by that at the time. But when my parents divorced, I was coming to that age where I was becoming quite rebellious, you know, that early adolescence where you're starting to find yourself, disassociate from the parents and move into your own world, you know. So in a way, I was quite glad that my dad was out of the way so I could, didn't have that disciplinarian around. Now I look back and I think I really could have benefited from that. But perhaps more so than me was my elder brother. And he was a lot more of a full-on character than me, quite an aggressive guy, quite, I guess you would say deep down he was lost, but he didn't want anyone to see that. So he was deeply searching to be this greatest guy he could be and got himself in all manner of trouble and drugs as well. And without the father around in the home, he kind of had no one to act as a sort of a monitoring, controlling principle, a limiting principle. So he got mixed up with the wrong communities, the wrong people, and he really lost himself. And it was very difficult for me to deal with because he was like my proxy father in the home with no actual father there. So witnessing him sort of degrade into drugs and eventually madness really from the drugs and being very violent in the home, it sort of broke my heart as a young teenager, about 14 at this point. And it was very difficult living with him, full of violence, the home, you know. And my mother couldn't really contain him either. And this went on for a number of years until he ended up in a hospital, drug addictions and mental health issues and so forth. And I think maybe in response to that, my mother had, she tried to kind of over-mother me, which I think is a common thing that men have today. You know, the book I'm reading at the moment called Adam's Return. It's all about initiation. And the author says, modern men are over-mothered and under-fathered. And I think that was definitely my experience. There's no real father around. So on one hand, I was traumatized by my elder brother's behavior and his violence. And on the other hand, I was over-mothered. So I wasn't really learning to stand on my own 2 feet. And because of that mix of sort of trauma and being over-mothered, I wasn't really prepared for the world. And I would try to deal with that by seeking status in communities. And how you could do that when I was a kid was by smoking weed, really. And who smoked the most weed was like the coolest. So I do my best to impress all the guys by having the biggest hits on the bong and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, that I thought that gave me some credibility. But again, it just led me into the wrong hands of the wrong people who didn't really have my long-term growth at heart. I don't blame them now because they were just kids themselves. But essentially, with that mixture of the smoking the cannabis, the trauma, being over-mothered, it led me to get panic attacks myself. And that led me to really shy away from the world. I became very insular, very afraid of the world, very afraid of violence erupting in my life because I hadn't dealt with those inner demons. And also, there was a girl I was seeing and she was sort of I was very needy around her because it was sort of a one source of love I had. And that led me to getting even more hurt and her to kind of rejecting me and going home with this guy one night who I really didn't like. And I never knew what happened, but it just drove me mad. And bit by bit, it just broke me, you know, and I turned into basically a compulsive drinker, you know, drinking alcohol to get through life. And I became a compulsive thinker as well. I think that's something that many guys don't speak about today. But for me, the thinking was way more damaging than the drinking. Even though the drinking had almost immediate consequences and obvious consequences, it's the thinking of constantly being in my head, of constantly never connecting with other people in a pure and honest and vulnerable way. So in my head, I was constantly strategizing and trying to create up all these ideals about life. And I got completely obsessed with like philosophy and trying to work the world out. And what am I for? And what's all this pain and suffering about? And I thought I was kind of making progress. But in reality, like when I look at my life, I was getting more insular, more alone, didn't know how to talk to girls or really make friends or anything like that. And that led me to sink into like online pornography instead of real dating, something I talk a lot about today. Not to, I'm not trying to moralize or anything like that. But my experience with porn was it's fun, but it takes something away from you. It grips onto something inside of you. And it almost pulls you into that world of pixels and novelty and away from real relationships and really expressing yourself as a man and having that beautiful sort of sexual tension that you get between men and women when you're a grounded guy. I just had no perception of any of that. And even if I did, I was too afraid to do anything about it. And this went on really post-university. I got into, I was very into folk music. So I tried to be a folk singer, but it was really more of a pipe dream. It was a mask I wore, really. And another way to try and express my pain. And then I got a call one day that my brother had committed suicide. So it was this really screwed up moment where I thought, well, I've been so distanced from him and I've never made the effort with him because of this inner resentment I've had to him, to what he did to me when I was young. But now I had this mixture of guilt, and another part of me was like, how do I process all this? And I ended up going back home to live with my mother for a few months to sort of get us through that period. And that was when, I drank really heavy for a couple of months, but then I was like, I need to sort my life out. I just have to, otherwise I'm going to end up like him. So I did everything I possibly could. I read all the self-help books, all the classics, and then this was kind of before pickup was really a thing, but I was reading like early pickup, I guess you could explain it as, and the kind of predecessors to pickup and getting into that. And you know what? It really worked. I started running. I started working out. I started eating healthy. I took on this really uber clean diet. I even did like raw vegan for 6 weeks and stuff, just going through this whole mission. Yeah, man. It was like, I look back on it with such fondness because I was so innocent. I was just trying everything to try and get my life going. I remember I used to run in the pouring rain in the middle of winter and just be like powering through, like I've got to find out how to get myself going. And I knew I had potential, but I just could not break free of this inner wall I created. And in time, I started to make progress and learn to speak to people and to present myself and so forth. And I ended up getting an opportunity down in London. I took advantage of it, and it took me way further than I was ready for. So I'd read all this stuff and I applied it because I was like reading it religiously, and I applied all this stuff I was learning. It ended up getting me a really good job, which was a little too too high a level than I was ready for. It's like editor-in-chief of this business journal, which I had to work for, but I ended up there in a short amount of time. I ended up going out with this girl as well who was older than me. And she was very attractive, but quite turbulent like me, and had inner issues, I'll say, like me. So I felt in my naivety back then, both of us coming from this kind of traumatized background, we'll fix each other, That's not how the world works.
No.
Yeah. So I had to learn that lesson, and that was a really hard one to learn. But anyway, I'd created this persona, this guy who could be this sort of business big shot, could talk to girls and was in this relationship. But within, I was still so broken. That inner boy who I'd never healed and never really spoken to was still really at the core of who I was. So again, I was trying to cover that up with alcohol. I was trying to cover it up with the relationship, with the job. And I was really striving to basically keep all of that balanced. And all that stuff was just getting heavier and heavier and heavier. The work was extremely stressful. It was a very cutthroat environment as well. There was some, I'll just say, less than reputable characters there, which made it a very hard job. And then the relationship was falling apart because she was older. And I was, again, you see, we had that very powerful meeting where I think it's more something inside you, the pain grabs onto the pain, and therefore you think it's love, but really it's something else. And because of that, I felt like she's the one. I was in that mindset. She's the one person, and this is going to be the reawakening of family in my life, and everything's going to be okay if I stay with her. But because of that, I completely lost my own self, my own masculine grounding. Not that I really had it in the first place, but I'd lost myself in her. And therefore, I was completely needy with her, and that drove her away and made her embrace other relationships, which made me embrace other ones. And then we'd be back together, and it became this absolute nightmare situation. I look back now, I cannot believe it was me, but I think we have to go through these things to learn. And I was getting to the point where I just thought, I cannot do this anymore. It was ripping me apart. Her with other guys, I would date other women and so forth, but I never wanted, I just wanted to be with her. I was only doing that because she was. And I spoke to this therapist at the time, and he said to me two things. First of all, he said, you've given her your balls. You've given her your balls on a platter, and she has your balls. Now, you don't usually hear that sort of thing from therapists.
No.
So I'm very pleased. Yeah, you might in the men's world. You might from like decent guys in the men's world who will tell you straight, but not really from therapists. So I'm very thankful I found that guy. Because that was right. I needed to hear that. And initially, it shocked me, but then it made me realize, man, I've got balls to give. What have I been doing all this time?
Yeah.
I'd never been initiated in that world of what a man is, So that began to change my thinking. And I was still too lost within everything, really, to truly let that seed break me free. But he began to think, like, what are you going to do with your life? And I just realized I'm either going to go mad or I'm going to end up dying like my brother. That's what's going to happen if I don't sort this out. So I kept trying to sort it out, and then I wouldn't, and then I would, and I wouldn't. I was going to like 12-step groups and all that sort of stuff to try and get myself sorted. But then one day it just got way too much. I was completely out of my mind. It felt like I was going completely mad. And I was just, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. And I ended up looking myself in the mirror. I'd been on a big drinking binge all weekend, and I looked like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. And I thought, I can't even look at myself. And my face was all flushed and red. My hair was a mess. And I was just broken, And I spoke to this therapist, and he recommended this rehab to me. So I went up to this rehab, and I was so utterly broken. Like, the trip up to that rehab was one of the most painful trips of my life. I couldn't even get on the train. And when I was on the train, I felt like a caged animal trapped on this train. It was only about an hour and a half journey, but it just felt like absolute hell. And at that point as well, I was drinking alcohol. It wasn't working anymore. And I went into this rehab, and I was just a broken man, completely and utterly done. I'd left my job at that point. The relationship had fallen apart, and she'd left. And I felt like I'd just gone mad. And I was like, well, this is it. It's over. At this point, I don't know what's going to happen. Death, I don't know. Whatever. So they realized I was in a bad way. They put me on this detox for 7 days. And when I came off that detox, something happened to me where, I'm not saying I was magically fixed, but for the first time in my life, I just had this peace. I had this peace within. It was like a very small sense of peace in my gut, And I thought, what on earth is that? I'd never felt anything like peace before. Now, I know now with what I know, looking back, what I'd done is I'd relinquished everything. I'd said, I don't know. I'd thrown my arms up to the universe and let go, I said, I'm not in control anymore. That's what had really happened. And therefore, I'd almost let go of my ego and my mental processes. And it gave me this sense of, well, what do you have to protect anymore? Let go. So with that, I befriended the right people in that rehab. They introduced me to more people. As soon as I came out, I started doing 12-step work, which was life-changing, going through my life, all of the resentments, the pain. But unlike a therapist, not going through them in a sense of, oh, poor you. I needed that at one time, but at this time I needed, but what are you going to do about it? And that's what someone said to me. It's what this guy said to me. What are you going to do about it? And again, I didn't realize I had that agency to do anything. I thought things happened to you and that was it. And you just deal with them and the pain that they cause. No, you can use these things to grow, and you can use these things to actually become twice the person you would have been anyway. So he opened that door up to me, and then we started to get more into the traditional spiritual stuff about realizing that there are parts of me which I have to, maybe discipline isn't the word, but maybe the word is garden, be aware of what's going on in my soul on a daily basis to find out if I'm moving the right direction or the wrong direction. And that, of course, opened me up to spiritual groups and spiritual wisdom, and realizing that, I don't know the best for me sometimes. So I have to be able to open my soul and let life, let other people in to help me, so we can live as one and I can be guided on this path. And once you have that openness, it really changed my life, because instead of being trapped in this is how you do life mentality, it allowed me to let go and say, that's what I think, but I might be wrong. I'm going to walk down this path and see what happens. If I'm wrong, fair enough. That's okay. I'll just move on to the next thing. It's not easy to live that way in this day and age because people like security. That's why, I think politics at the moment is so fractious because everyone's got a secure, definite policy. But most of the time we don't know. And it takes balls to admit you don't know. But in time, if you go with that philosophy, you will find your way, but you have to be willing to live with insecurity and uncertainty to find the path. You have to be lost to be found, so to speak. And then through the spiritual work, I really love the spiritual work. Again, I still do lots of it. But something was missing, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I felt that there was this essence missing from the spiritual work. And then I went on a men's retreat. I thought I'll just give it a go, see what it's like. And I was quite good at the spiritual side of it, the speaking your truth, letting everything out type stuff. But I'd never been confronted with the really challenging side of it before, where you're like staring a guy eye to eye and you're screaming in each other's face and all that sort of stuff, and you're wrestling. And those experiences, they allowed me to deal with the stuff that really happened in my core with my elder brother, with the violence. It allowed me to relive that and realize I'm not a little boy anymore. I'm a man. I'm a 6-foot man who's been working out in the gym. I've got strength and power, but I don't want to use that power like a tyrant, but I have to learn how to use it. So this sort of work, again, it was like the last piece I was looking for. The spiritual work taught me forgiveness and to pray for people's souls and to overcome resentment in time, of course. I'm not saying it's an immediate process. And the men's work taught me how to embody a strong energy. And it's almost those two together. I started to realize all the work I've been doing, it's really been the re-implementation of what I call the Father, with a capital F. Now that sounds very Christian, and in a way it is quite Christian in the original sense, but I personally think the church has got a bit lost. It's a personal opinion of mine. It tends to be either too far ultra-conservative or too far ultra-liberal, and I think we kind of lost that essence of coming back, especially for men, coming back to the Father. And I don't mean that doesn't have to mean God, so to speak, but it can mean your own innermost truth. It can mean your pure being sense. Then it also means the cultural father in terms of the traditions we follow, the code of honors we live by, the tribes we have. And then, of course, your immediate father or immediate father figure. What's your relationship with him? And I realized I've been on this journey of fixing each of those relationships. And once I had them fixed, finally, I was a stable person. And it seems so obvious. I was like, of course. But when you don't know, you just don't know. And from that point on, I was starting to be able to learn about masculine and feminine energy and dating. I had a bit of a flirt with pickup, but never really went fully into it because I felt there was lost boy elements in there of seeking your own value from how women perceive you, and also instant gratification. There's a lot of instant gratification there. I think there are things worth learning there, but it was a step I had to go through and move on from. And then I started to basically go back to the corporate world. Work was going well. I was no longer living in my mind, but living in being, as I call it, letting go to life. And I started to see, I'm just not in the right place. I'm not in the right place. So I wrote a book, which I incidentally have just here, actually, From Lost Boy to Awakened Man. That's my book.
Nice.
Yeah, man. So I wrote that book in my spare time. I started freelancing, which gave me the time to do it. And then things built and built. And I thought, I'm going to just go into this. This is what I want to do with my life. So I started training in all manner of forms of different coaching and learning about, well, to be honest, my background is publishing. So I knew a lot about publishing, but more the entrepreneurial side, studying and all that. And then bit by bit, I grew out my website, which is where I started with pure content marketing. And then I built a small little community with that. And then I took it onto YouTube, which I'm trying to grow out my YouTube channel now, making regular videos. And that led to another little community, which I've turned into a men's forum where we meet weekly. And we discuss personal growth, the principles of growth, every issue you can imagine under the sun, of that blend between getting deeply vulnerable and sharing our truth, but also challenging each other. I think men really need that today. We need to be in an environment, man, where we feel, look, we need to feel that we've got that empathy. We're not there to bully anybody. So they've got to feel that underlying trust. But at the same time, we don't just want to be nice and, oh, that's a good idea. What do you think? That's another night. We've got to say, no, come on, do this. You can do it. You really can. We need to pull each other up. And because we kind of lost these structures to guide us as men, I think the light is on us now, our generation, to do it ourselves. And for me, this journey has just grown and grown. And with it, my heart has grown, more light has come into my life and more purpose as well. So I said I'd give you the page notes version, but I managed to go on for quite a while. I do apologize for that. I have a tendency to talk.
No, don't apologize. I wonder how many of the people listening or watching this could actually identify with at least one of the masks that we as men wear, whether it's the pornography mask, whether it's being too much stuck in here and kind of no balls and just brain, or the fact that it's alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, any kind of vice you could think of. I think as men, we tend to have this kind of tendency, especially right now where we're living in an age being overstimulated with all sorts of information. It's very difficult. The interesting thing is, before I actually hopped on this podcast with you, I was doing a men's circle call, and they asked me, "Oh, can you state your purpose?" And I said something, and then the other thing was, "Oh, I believe, really truly believe, we live right now not so much in a patriarchy, but in a poarchy. What is this kind of rule of boys? You know, men haven't gone through rites of initiation," and everybody was kind of like, yeah, kind of agreeing, sort of. And this really comes back to this kind of father archetype. We're not getting too much into religion, because that could be, a can of worms for some people that get triggered. I think people get triggered by everything these days. But it is about us right now. The light is on us, like you said, really, for us to bring back these fathers from ourselves and really put them out there, because I think so many other men really need this type of father approval and wisdom that I think this archetype carries.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think the key thing about this initiation that is so vital is there's an element of you that has to be humbled. I think that's very key in our growth as men. And one thing that I've seen a bit of is some guys have been humbled by life, but they've been given no network of long-term growth to deal with that humbling. Because the idea of humbling is essentially to get out of your mind, as you say. Guys are in their heads and not in their balls, not in their hearts, So if we're stuck in our head all the time, it's like we've been humbled and we've almost retreated to the mind for security. I do feel lots of people are sort of spiritually traumatized without even knowing they are. It's usually that thing where we experience something damaging in life and we go to our mind to make sure it never happens again. And we plan and we plan and we theorize. But it never really works, because we try and create this reality for ourselves and we start living in this ideology rather than pure reality. And I think, again, being humbled is something which is a true blessing. It's like what happened to me when I went to the rehab. I was humbled by life. It made me give in. And in that giving in, it made me realize there's something deeper here than just me. Life isn't about me all the time. It's about something way bigger than that. It's something we all share at our root, and that you could call that just the expression of life itself, if you will. And then the flip side of that is you get guys who've never really been humbled. So they kind of live in this world of kind of arrogance and overconfidence. And that can lead guys into all kinds of mess as well. Especially, you can very much lose yourself in that world. And I saw it a lot in the corporate world, in the sales world, and it's usually maintained by cocaine and alcohol and things like that, or other behaviors which can make you seem immensely strong and never doubting yourself. But I think there's that balance to be made. Once you go through that humbling experience, and then it's rebuilding yourself as a richer individual. In my book, in 7 Steps, I call it the higher self and the lower self. And you have to tap into what is this higher self within you? What is that force of wisdom that we all have at our core? What's the lower self? How is that impacting our lives? And if we don't do that, if we don't have that understanding, we'll just get trapped in the lower self.
That's a potent message right there. I think, listening to you and thinking about this, you really have to be humbled. You really have to be broken to be properly rebuilt, because we do carry, like you said, all these traumatic experiences, and it doesn't have to be something very, very traumatic, although sometimes it does. But, I don't know, small things kind of tend to build up over and over and over. And they tend to kind of manifest somewhat in the body, and we think that we can think our way out of the problem, but it doesn't work. You really have to, like you said, embody certain characteristics that only happen through, I guess, more pain, or some suffering in a constructive way, like, you know, going through a rites of initiation or a rites of passage that few of us actually go through, because I think because we've lost so many elders and we've lost all this wisdom. What do you think we can do right now? Because I kind of want to continue what you said about the light is on us. What do you think we can do right now as men for us to be able to heal up and show, not just for ourselves, but also for future generations?
Yeah, good question, man. Good question. I think first things first, whether you truly believe this or not is irrelevant, but I think we have to start looking within first, because our own experience of life is the most vital. And I think there's so many experts online, and it's like you go on Twitter and the arguments are so strong and so raw, and they both completely demonize the opposition, if you will. And I think this is really relevant for men, because what does it mean to be a man today? That is like a huge question. You know, one side is all toxic masculinity, blah, blah, blah. The other side is kind of alpha. Now, I gravitate more towards the alpha side, but I think that can get a little too far in and of itself. But I think fundamentally, it is the first thing I think you can do is go within and find where the obstacles are, because it's in the obstacles that you'll find where you need to grow. It's almost, again, it's this thing of life shines the light. Life knows where the wisdom is. An interesting thing, I've got a friend who likes to drop acid and do all that sort of stuff. Now, I don't take any drugs myself with my background. I'm not really into drugs anymore, but I'm always interested to hear his stories. And he does all sorts of things, you know, DMT and the rest of it. And he was always out with different people doing it. And he was telling me that if anyone has anything that's bothering them in their lives, when they, you know, drop acid or DMT or whatever, the consciousness will go straight to the issue, you know. And that to me says it's almost like our inner consciousness, our inner light will go. It needs to sort out whatever's in your soul before you can truly experience life. And I think that's why when people do have these experiences and they're holding on to stuff, they have these bad trips, so to speak. Now, that's an example of what happens in drugs, but in our day-to-day lives, it's not too dissimilar. Because if we have these things within us, we're never truly going to be able to live life from that neutral place, or at least from a place where we can truly be in our own energy, free and at peace. So first things first, I think, is go within, be aware of what your problems are and how they're impacting your life. And then I think we do need to go on this journey of not just talking about them, because that's what I did for years, just spoke about them. And it helps right, yeah. It helps for a while. It might help for 3 to 6 months. And if you've been like really traumatized, it might help. But I think what we need to do more than talk about them is start to go within and start to actually do work around them. And what that work is, well, it comes in many different ways. You can do traditional spiritual work, or you can do traditional men's work, or many other things. But most fundamentally, I think it's sharing it with other men and going on that journey of physical, mental, and spiritual growth, if you will. Now, we can get into different ways to do that, but in a way, it's an endless field. But I think that's where you have to start. It's a wonderful line, I think, from Carl Jung, that it's the tree whose roots grow to hell that grows to heaven, you know? And I think that's where we have to start. We have to go within and clean ourselves of what's there. Then once we've done that, I think that's when we have to start embracing the masculine archetypes, the positive masculine archetypes. So I was making a video yesterday about what's wrong with being manly. You know, what's wrong with that? Because there's this thing going on in China, and there's, you know, talk on Twitter that it's wrong to try and make men manly. But why? What's wrong with being manly? What's happened in our culture to make us think it's bad to be manly? So we have to start building a positive picture of masculinity for guys, you know? I don't think we have to really go too far from what we've already got. You know, we're not a million miles from it already, but it just has to be explored in language that guys can understand today. So I think, first of all, it's doing the inner work, and then it's finding out what it means to be a man. spiritually, emotionally, personally.
It's a great point you're making there. I think I think it's fair to say, at least from my tower and what I'm seeing right now, is that masculinity seems to be under attack. Right? There's, like you said, I mean, I learned through life that, you know, nothing is black and white, right? I don't know if I'm not gonna get into this right now. Maybe we can, but the whole, you know, situation right now with the virus, is there a virus? Is there isn't, like, there's two camps, and it's just, there's so many nuances into that. Same thing with masculinity, is either toxic masculinity or like I'm the type of alpha guy. And usually, like everything else, the truth, however you choose to kind of define that, is somewhat in the middle, right? But I can definitely see it's almost a bad thing to say, you know, I'm trying to learn to become a better man, a more masculine man. And this seems like to be this kind of egalitarian, I think is the word, agenda about everybody's kind of the same, and this homogeneous nature of society, which I think is incredibly dangerous. We can get into the kind of the reasons why that is, but yeah, it's almost like a sin being, you know, saying that, you know, oh, that's a masculine man right there, and people kind of have all these negative connotations about that.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, I think that that's definitely the biggest issue of our generation. I mean, one of the things I saw in all the different forms of work that I've done over the last few years, and inspired me to make Awaken Man as well, was guys over 40 were very often saying this, you know, I've never been able to express myself. I need to say what I've got to say, that kind of side of things. But the guys under 40 were saying the same things. But I knew them, and I was like, you're always expressing yourself, you know. Like, there's this one guy I knew who was like very sweet, soft, gentle English guy, like very lovely guy. And he was saying to me once that he's going, you know, I've really got to start working on my toxic masculinity. I was thinking, dude, you
What?
need some toxic masculinity. Like, you
Wow.
need like a good dose of it, you know, that'll balance you out. And I started to think, like, these guys have been spoon-fed this idea that masculinity is bad, that if they ever embody any kind of aggressive, dominant behavior, that's evil, and therefore they just become weaker and weaker and more timid and more afraid, and then they get more traumatized as well, and eventually more resentful, which I think, again, is in part why we're seeing this incredible anger towards masculinity at times, where they just badmouth it constantly. It's this bad thing. I think there's lots of guys deep down, I think they crave it, but because they've been almost ostracized from it, they have this anger towards it. That's how I felt when I was young, when I wasn't close with my father. I was angry with my brother. I'd been raised in a feminist education. So when I looked at masculinity, I thought, I don't want anything to do with that. Like, I'm a good guy. You know, but deep down, I craved it. I couldn't admit it to myself, but I did. I craved the love of a father, of a tribe, of a community. I craved the challenge to make me say, like, you can do this, sort yourself out, that sort of stuff. But I never had it. So I think that that's one side of things today. Another thing with that debate as well around, you know, why masculinity has become toxic and so forth. I think there was a time originally where, if you like, the early feminist movement or whatever, maybe there was a time where men were being too OTT. I can kind of get that. Maybe that was true. But the way it's gone from there, it's completely gone into overdrive. I think there's lots of personal pain some people feel, and they turn their own experiences into the whole, you know. So if someone's had bad experiences with their father, the whole father becomes bad.
They tend to generalize, and
they generalize, yeah, and they go into academia and they express what they've experienced, and then they make that seem like it's everyone. And that, again, I think is why I'm so interested in the father with a capital F, because I think the West has lost faith in the father. You know, obviously in a religious context, you know, God the Father, use that language, people just be like, I do not want to listen to you at all. Not that I'm particularly religious, but I think it's interesting that, you know, there's a key thing that we've lost that. Then again, the whole thing about boundaries, I always think, you know, the debate about immigration is another example of that. The traditional masculine, which is boundaries, and the feminine, which is openness. And you think we very much prize this idea of, like, very much open, and anyone who says anything about boundaries, we kind of immediately see as evil. I'm not saying that I'm pro or anti that. I'm not trying to make a political point. It's just that it's an observation of how we process these things. Another thing is in the personal level, again, fathers aren't in the home. So that father archetype on all levels of our being, if you like, has been eradicated. And henceforth, it's led to this demonization of masculinity. And it's almost like kicking it while it's down rather than realizing we actually need to rebuild it and let it harmonize with the feminine.
Yeah, I don't want to kind of sound like we're kind of blowing our horns here, but I tend to agree, man. I think we need more of this kind of father energy, but being reintegrated, because I can't remember the book I was reading. Maybe it was Sam Keen, Fire in the Belly, what he says, you know, when a boy comes of age, there is kind of a hole that kind of forms, and it usually needs to be filled with rites of passage, mature masculine energy. Well, when the father isn't there, there's just this kind of void gets filled with demons. Hence why the projection and overgeneralization of men are bad and yada yada yada, whatever happens. So yeah, I think, and also men. There's this book I was reading by Stefan Arnio. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. Hard Times Create Strong Men. There was like a very short essence there that really kind of captured my attention. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And he was kind of explaining that this is an 8-year cycle, and each passage is worth like a one generation, 20 years or so. And he was kind of referring that we're at the tail end of this, like weak men create hard times, and now we're getting into the hard times with everything that's been happening around the world. So I really think, despite what maybe certain people in the world, not to get into conspiracies or anything like that, or you know what the culture and society views, I think mature masculinity is going to make a comeback. I think that's just kind of what, yeah, it has to, right?
Yeah, I think it has to. I mean, I think we're in serious trouble if we don't. I mean, again, another thing we haven't touched on yet, but which is so vital about this conversation, and this is what you find out when you start seeing women, is women want masculine men. And again, it's like you say that on the kind of Twitter sphere or the mainstream media, it's like, oh my God, how dare you? But it's just so true. Like in every guy's experience who goes out there, women tend to like those traits in men. And again, you have this eradication of these traits, and then that leads to all manner of relationship breakdowns and problems and so on and so on. But it's another really key facet in getting that harmony, the masculine and feminine harmony right. You know, it's most men identify with their inner masculine, and there's nothing wrong with that. And most women identify with their inner feminine, and they want that. Women like to have that masculine leader type figure. I'm not saying in this kind of old school way that she can never speak and you decide absolutely every last little thing. Obviously, you know, she's got her own space, but she needs to know that she can rely on a guy who's coming from a place of stillness, of solidity, who's found himself within himself. I mean, I'm thinking about this a lot recently, so this is kind of me completely spitballing. I haven't quite worked this one out yet, but I'm almost coming to the conclusion that the idea of love that we're fed when we're kids is just not really true. I mean, I think we grow up with it with pop music, and I'll just be this dude, and you know, she'll love me for who I am and all that sort of stuff.
Disney movies.
Yeah, right, exactly. And you think, well, it's almost more like a man has to find his peace within himself. And again, I think that comes from the archetypal father. That's the kind of traditional love, if you like. Selflessness is love, right? So we find our deeper meaning in life, and then we actualize that in purpose. We become peaceful within ourselves. And I think women see that, and that's why they're attracted to men on their mission, because it's almost like they can move into that love, you know, and then they open themselves to love because they know it's safe. So it's not this kind of magical, I spotted her from the other side of the hall and she fell in love with me and I fell in love with her. She might fancy you, you might fancy her, but it's not love. You know, we're very soppy today with that idea. I think it's much more of a thing about they move in to your love, which you have in and of yourself. And if you try and force your love on her, you're pointing it in the wrong direction. You know, you'll frighten her away. You know, you need to put your love and focus on something grander, you know, your big being, your big purpose, and she will join into that. I'm not saying that's right for absolutely everybody, but it has been something that I've been observing increasingly in my own life and relationships. And you think, yeah, maybe there's something to that. I mean, again, I need to work it through a bit more and see where I'm really going with it. But I'm starting to come to that position as well. And that's why, again, it's why it's so important that men turn away from women and back to, if you like, this mission in their own lives.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. We were actually talking about The Way the Spirit Man, book by David Data. Highly recommended. People probably heard about it. If you haven't read it, read it. In there, he says, really focus on your mission first. Everything else is kind of secondary. A woman never wants to be number one because that kind of suffocates and scares her away. Of course, with everything, there is no 100% truth in that because there's always exceptions. So I'm obviously overgeneralizing here. It's really interesting to see, like, whenever I post something like this that may be a little bit more controversial, or people say, oh, you have to be politically correct, and I'm like, screw that. People get so triggered today. Like, everybody's like so on not on the fence, but like just waiting for someone to say something to kind of call them out. And I think that's incredibly dangerous. I think the more we move away from the frontier of survival, the more kind of feminized we become. Feminine democracy usually leads to tyranny. So yeah, we definitely need more of that.
Yeah, no, you're a bit based there, man. Based there, yeah. But I think you're onto something. I mean, one of the things I have noted as well is, I think I heard Jordan Peterson talking about men, on average, tend to deal with problems in a more upfront way. So it's that thing of like, you know, you're playing football or whatever, someone messes up, you know, what the fuck are you doing? What did you do that for? That sort of thing. It's more straight on. But women, and they might even physically fight men as well, but once they do, it's kind of over.
Yeah.
But women tend to drive more towards character assassination, you know? So it's more about that person's terrible. Have you heard what she did? And historically, that tends to be how women deal with conflict. And then you look at social media and you think, what's the energy there? Is it a masculine energy? It doesn't feel that way to me. It feels very much more towards this kind of character assassination side. And some of the language that you use on, well, not I use, but people that you see use on social media, like, for instance, I was reading something the other day and someone did something a bit politically incorrect. I think it was some football chairman of the FA in the UK. He's an old guy, so he's not up to date with all the modern, you know, fancy PC language. He said, he goes, it's all right, women playing football, we support it, but you have to remember, women don't like it when they get the ball kicked at them hard, you know, which I thought was really funny. It's very un-PC and blah, blah, blah. And I know he shouldn't have said it, but I thought, like, you know, he was just getting pilloried in the media. And I was reading this, like, review of what he'd said, and someone was saying, like, this is an example of the abhorrent views that men in the FA hold. It's like abhorrent. Like, how often do you hear that word? That's like,
I don't even know what it means.
It means like really bad, like awful, you know, like terrible. And I was thinking, like, that is, the language we use is so over the top these days. He's just an old guy who screwed up, you know, it's not the end of the world. But we use this really extreme language, and you get it all the time on the sort of MSM, the mainstream media and social media, where we use this character assassinating type language of, you're the most awful person, and this guy might have done something relatively minor, but they just get destroyed. And I sometimes think it's bred this culture and society where we're fearful now of upsetting people because the blowback is so strong. It's so intense. It's not just you got that wrong. You're an awful, terrible person. And again, I don't keep going back to religion, but I think it is quite key. We've taken away these religious substructures. It's almost like we're recreating this puritanical good and evil. And if you're kind of on this right on PC side, you're good. But if you get on the wrong side of it, you're evil. And also, we don't seem to have any mechanism for the atonement of sin these days either. It's like, if you've screwed up, that's it. You're just in the bad camp, and we just hate you, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it does tend to be this kind of very in-group identity. And so if you are willing to stand against it, you do have to have balls today. You know, you really do. You got to be willing to take a lot of flack.
Yeah, it's a PC police, or I'm not sure how it's called. I've never really subscribed to that. maybe because of Eastern European, a little bit more outspoken, even when I was living in London, in the UK for about 10 years. Yeah, sometimes you kind of have to maneuver, but I wasn't really that conscious about these things, and I just spoke my mind. But I really think that the more I'm getting into this sort of work and working with men, the more I see it's not about inclusion. Oh yeah, everybody's in, have 60 whatever type of genders there, and people identifying with cats. And I mean, I'm getting too deep into this, but it's not okay, and it's okay to not to be okay, and you to speak your mind about this, because yeah, I think that's how a civilization is being broken and destroyed, really.
I hear what you're saying, and I think even though in men's work you do have two sides of it that I've experienced. You get them all kind of right on PC side, where it's all inclusivity, and there is a men's group I'm part of as well, where there was this big conversation about, you know, are trans men, and should trans men be part of our group? And it's a massive issue because it's going to split people right down the middle. And the group was split half in half, saying, well, one half was saying no, and of course the other half was saying you're all evil fascists and all that sort of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, and the other half were like, well, look, I just think it's a different experience, and it's the same issue I've had before with, you know, what about if it's a gay guy? You know, would that make a difference to a men's group? But, I mean, I think it would change the energy personally, because your outlook on life is so different. But then, to be fair, you've got guys like, I think it's Jack Donovan, who's like, he doesn't call himself gay, but he's, you know,
open, yeah,
with guys, basically. I'll put it that way. And he's pretty bang on, so you wouldn't like dismiss him from a men's group. But I think it's more, I can get what people are saying when they think, well, look, we don't want to have this kind of ideology come in, because that it starts with that, and then it becomes, well, why don't we get female speakers and then female leaders? And that's, in a way, is what's happened. I'm not going to name names, but it has happened with certain men's groups I'm aware of, where it started off as like a men's group, and then you kind of let in these philosophies, if you like, and then it spreads basically to, yeah, basically like women run workshops. And that's fair enough if that's what you want. But I do believe in spaces for men, you know, and I think there's nothing wrong with spaces for heterosexual men, because to be put it bluntly, our outlook is so shared, and so much of being a man is how we interact with women, you know, and that is very vital. It's not everything men's groups are about, but it's very key.
I agree with you. The more boundaries I put around these things, and actually that's a great thing that you're bringing up, because I was also thinking in my head, like, is it okay to have trans men? And I came to the conclusion that definitely no. Just because you've changed your gender doesn't mean you're a man. Personally, I don't really care. Like, it's your choice, it's your body, you made that decision, more power to you, do your thing. But in a men's group, there is certain boundaries, and someone needs to stand up and say, yo, this is okay and this is not okay. And it's not okay to be in a certain group, and it's okay maybe to be in other groups. Maybe I'm not your kind of cup of tea, as they say. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It just brings a different energy, and especially when you bring in women into, and it's the same way, can't remember who I was speaking with, but this whole notion of polarity, if you have only women's circles and just a man comes in, energy changes, vice versa with,
definitely.
Yeah, like, yeah, you can't ignore these subtle notions, because it just kind of undermines the whole foundation of the thing.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I've even been out with friends before, just having coffee or whatever, and just noticed, like, this is a memory of a year or so ago, but I was having coffee with a friend, and this girl walked in that I know from my local area, and she's kind of pretty, nothing special, but kind of pretty. And I said, oh, hey, how you doing? As she walked by. And she said hi. And then she went off to get a coffee, and I was just chatting to my friend, and I just noticed his energy change immediately. Like, he went from just talking to me like this to all of a sudden being like, you know, leaning down in his chair and swooping his hair and like, yeah, I don't know what you're up to tonight, man, and all that sort of stuff. And I just thought, this is what happens to men, you know, when they see women, especially if they're a bit lost in female energy and they haven't done any work on themselves. That's what happens. And again, if you bring different energies into a men's group, it can completely change how guys act. And again, like you say, I mean, I think I'm not anti anybody doing what they want, but I think, you know, there could be men's groups for all different types of people. And if guys decide that what they want is more of a heterosexual type approach, I think that should be more than welcome.
Yeah. Good point. I'm with you on this one. I think exclusion and going forward is really, and setting boundaries is really the way. I think if this was to thrive, rather than going down of us, everybody being the same, we're equal, etc., etc. On some level we are, but like that tends to get very, very much like twisted, so to speak.
Definitely. Yeah. No, I think that that's happened en masse. I mean, sort of made this point in my videos that I get it from a spiritual perspective, you know, that spirit level, you could make the case that we all are coming from the same energy, if you like. We're all from the universe, if you like. So on that level, yes. But in manifestation, in who we are, in how we go about life, it's very different. Like it really is different. And I do, you know, appreciate the way that you're talking about boundaries, because it's such a big issue. And they're so shat upon today, boundaries. We see them as bad things. You know, I did this video and it was about Harry Styles, you know, the singer. He's from One Direction. They're like a tweeny pop band. He wore this dress for, I don't know who it was for, maybe a women's magazine or something. So he's wearing this dress. And
well, like a female's dress?
Yeah, like a female's dress. And on the magazine, it had like a quote from him on the front page where it said like, all boundaries need to be broken until you're free. And I thought that just sums up this modern right-on ideology. It's so naive. It's that you will not be free if you break down all boundaries, you know. You will actually find yourself, again, in some kind of hyper foundational spiritual concept. I can appreciate that message, but in a practical sense, you will not find freedom if you break down all boundaries, especially as a man. You know, you need boundaries to guide you to overcome difficulties. And again, there are times in men's circles where you're going to break boundaries. There are times where you're going to build boundaries. But this idea of just eradicate them completely, again, I think it comes back to this general distrust and dislike of the father, because putting down boundaries is a classic fatherly masculine thing to do.
I mean, yeah, totally with you on that one. I remember, I mean, I was being fed by all of this BS by society, and you know, being brought up by a overly overly caring mother. It kind of trickled down on me as well, right? Like women this and men are bad. And honestly, I was, for a good, maybe until I was like 24 or 25, I was really afraid of men. Like the whole energy, the whole competition. That's partially why I started doing martial arts and competing, is to actually get a little bit access to this energy, because we both have masculine and feminine energy. But if we are kind of on too much on the one side, everything kind of gets neglected and you go into the shadow part of it. So you need to be careful there.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. I think we do have masculine and feminine parts of us, but again, fundamentally with men, the vast majority of men, the masculine side needs to be bigger, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. Because again, it's like, it's the relationship thing. When you meet a woman, you know, it's like your masculine side needs to be stronger than her masculine side. And that allows you to create harmony. So again, there's nothing wrong with an expressed masculine side, but you can get an overexpressed one. But fundamentally, I do, I do identify with what you're saying, because again, my elder brother being violent, my father being distant, it led me to have a distrust of men. And another thing that you find with guys who are overmothered is the mother will tell them things about their father. Even if they don't, they might even insinuate them in their emotions. And so guys will often grow up and think like, you know, I'm not going to be like that bad guy that mum is always moaning about. Or even once they go to school and the girls are always moaning about the bad boy because the bad boy don't care about them. And the bad boy's the one that they're screwing, but they're saying he's such a dick and he does this and he does that. But really, that's what they want. But we, when we're young and uninitiated, will hear those messages and think, well, I'll be the opposite then. I'll be the kind of the gay best friend, basically, is what you can turn into all too easily. And you don't even know it's happened to you. And again, the mainstream culture just, again, I call it the Chandler Bing fallacy. You know, Chandler Bing from Friends.
Yeah.
We watch that show and
ultra lovable guy, yeah, super nice guy, but super lovable loser.
Exactly. Most guys grow up watching things like Friends and girls like Friends, and they're like, oh, I love Chandler. And guys identify with Chandler nowadays because they're neurotic and they're afraid. And so they think, oh, but Chandler acts like that and he gets Monica. So they try and do it, but that's not how the world works.
Mm. Yeah, I think if you fall into this kind of fallacy of listening to women, what they really want is they want a beta who's going to be a provider, but they're actually going to go and sleep with the alpha.
Or
And again,
some women want that.
yeah, good point. Good point. There's always there's a lot more nuances to that. It's not as easy or straightforward as that. But yeah, especially if you're brought up by a very caring mother, most of the time the boy is going to see the father through the mother's eyes, and
Very true.
that had a huge impact on me. So yeah, more boundaries. That's kind of one takeaway here. And I think that's how people, or how men, should I say, find this whole red pill philosophy or kind of movement, or could you call it even an ideology?
Well, I think you could, but again, I was making a video about this the other day, but I think it's definitely guys. It's worth guys being aware of the red pill and going into that ideology. I think even if you disagree with it, I think it's important you know what it is, because if you listen to the media, they'll just lie and just tell you things that aren't true. My experience of like red pill content creators and red pill guys isn't much like what the media says. And on top of that, there is some negatives in that movement, but fundamentally, I think they do teach you things which do open your eyes. The downside to it, though, I think, is the way I've tried to see it is like it's an insight, it's a framework upon which you can build, right? And add to your understanding, but you shouldn't treat it as like complete gospel. You should understand what they're saying, consider it, and go out in the real world and learn from your own experience. See if what they're saying is true in your own experience. Because one of the things I've seen, one of the things that happens to guys is they'll imbibe first of all, they'll be, the typical blue pill Chandler Bing guy. And then they'll get absolutely smashed apart by something. They'll get with a girl who cheats on them, or they'll just never get a girl, or something like that. And it will lead them to think, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And then they'll go online and they'll find this content and they'll be like, oh my God, I cannot believe it. This is explaining everything for me. It makes so much sense. It seems so obvious. It's what I thought when because I remember being like 11 and I remember thinking some of that red pill stuff. But then as I grew and got older, it's almost like I got indoctrinated into thinking, no, that can't be true. But anyway, the point I'm getting at is a lot of guys, I think they come from like a wounded, broken place. And so they'll go to the red pill stuff and they treat it like gospel and it becomes ideology. What I mean by that is it becomes their way of reading the world. They don't have any recourse to action. So what I mean is instead of adopting some of these ideas or some of these, what you might call life truths, and applying them in their own lives to see if they're true and then building it into the wisdom of their own being, they just put it in their heads and they use it as a prism through which to see the whole world, And henceforth, what you'll find then is you'll get guys who say like, oh, red pill's all bullshit. I used to believe that, blah, blah, blah. But it's not that it's all BS. It's that you've often cling too tightly onto it. And you'll also find guys who get lost in that red pill rage. They get really angry, again, because they're trapped in the ideology. Again, I think what they need to escape that is initiation and grounding, because then you can take on the wisdom, but also find a deeper part of yourself without getting too lost. And again, the immediate needs that are not being met, especially since you've imbibed red pill philosophy.
I think I was interviewing one gentleman. His name is Alan McGrath Hisbo, and he said something really struck me. He said there's three types of wisdom. One is the one that you hear from your friends and family and relatives, so on. Number two is the one that you read in books and consume by courses, etc. Number three is experience. And I think a lot of men, from my experience, what I see, a lot of men tend to kind of cling, and I've been one of those where I'll just read a book 10 times and start preaching it without actually experiencing what am I actually saying here. Am I just regurgitating what I just read without actually having tested it out myself? So there is a fine line there between being quote unquote blue pilled and then going onto the red pill and taking an extreme stance, and then urging other men and people in general just to kind of find a balance between those two things.
Well, definitely. But I think, as you say, the key thing is experiencing it for yourself.
Mm.
Had chats with older guys who've been divorced and stuff, and they don't know anything about the red pill or what it is. But they're red pilled without even knowing they're red pilled. You know, they've been red pilled by life. They've been red pilled by pure experience. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and they tell me things, and I'll think like, yeah, you sound like one of those red pill guys online, but they don't know that language. So again, that's purely experiential. So that's what's more important. And again, these are just ideas, and that's why I think you shouldn't poo-poo them and say, oh, they're just a load of crap or they're toxic masculinity. You should look at them for what they are, apply them in your own experience and see if they're true. In my experience, a lot of the red pill stuff is true. Not every single last little bit. And again, one of the problems is it can make you go down into rabbit holes of thinking this is how the world works, when sometimes it's a lot richer than just, you know, it's an ideology that you may have picked up in a book, as you were saying. But fundamentally, yeah, I think you've got to go out there, experience things for yourself. And again, this relates to another thing that I think men have to get over, and that's rejection. Like, we hate rejection. So we don't like going out in the world and trying things. Because again, I was chatting to someone the other day, and incidentally, I'm going to start making a bit more content on things like dating and so forth, because, you know, I went through the whole pickup thing, the whole red pill thing, with about 9 years worth of experience in reading that material, applying it, going to different groups, chatting to different people, loads of dates, speaking to different girls, all that sort of stuff. And I realized I've been in conversations with people sometimes, and all they've ever done is read books. Like, they haven't actually gone and lived it. You know, so they might know all the terminology and every last little thing, but have they gone out and lived it? And again, I think when you do, you start to understand some elements are true and some elements need a bit of tweaking, and some I just don't personally agree with. So yeah, that's the key.
Mm. Cool, man. I think we can spend at least a couple of hours talking around this stuff. Maybe we can do a part 2.
Yeah, man.
I like to wrap these conversations as interesting as they are, with one question. Was there something that you would have likened? Oh, I think I kind of butchered this. Was there something that you would have likened me to ask you that I didn't?
I mean, maybe there was nothing I was expecting you to ask me or hoping you would, but the one that I suppose is always good is, what is my path of initiation?
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I tend to gravitate towards this 7-step model, which I've created over a number of years. It used to be 9 steps, but I took it down to 7. And it involves a lot of one-on-one work where we basically will go within. And if you remember at the beginning, I was saying I went through everything within me and broke down every experience. So that's how we start. I call that the soul inventory. We find out what's controlling who you are, how you've been spiritually traumatized. In step 2, we go through what I call a symbolic death. That's letting go of all of these broken parts of you. And it's quite a long process. I don't usually really go into how we do that because it's specific to different guys. Some people might need periods of solitude. Some guys might need the opposite. They might need to go and put themselves in somewhere very noisy. They might need to travel to a different place. So it works differently for different people. And then we come into this higher power and lower power, understanding your being nature. Again, that's classic masculinity, especially if you read David Data, and your lower self, which is being pulled into the world off your purpose and how you're going to manage that. Step 4 is all about building your code of honor and a goal hierarchy, as I call it, to have a plan of life. Step 7 is femininity. We explore how your mother has impacted you, how women have impacted you, how you'd like to respond to women in your life or women in the future, and also Mother Nature. And then we move into the masculine, the 3 fathers that I explored earlier, implementing those 3 in your life. And then finally, it's the ongoing path. So that's the path towards, as I call it, the awakened man, being aware mentally, having your heart open, having your soul open, and having your spirit well and truly willing to move on, evolve, and embrace life. So that's a quick wrap up of the 7 steps.
Beautiful. I think people should go and check out your book, man.
Thank you. Yeah.
For people who resonate with your message, with your energy, what can they find a little bit more about you?
Yeah, so you can check me out at awakenedman.co.uk or YouTube, Awakened Man. I should come up if you just search Awakened Man. Everything you need will pretty much be there. If you want to pick up the book, you can get it from Amazon or my website, whichever you prefer. If you just want to read about it, go onto my website to learn a bit more about it. I also run a men's forum, all details on my website as well. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. So check me out there.
I'll be sure to put all the links into the show notes so people can kind of see on the different social media platforms.
That'd be very kind, man. Thank you very much.
No problem. Any final notes before we wrap up?
I think what I would say to any men who are listening to this is, again, go within, find your own truth, stop listening to everybody else and find what's true within. That's where the answers are. Every spiritual master throughout time has said that. Just in your life, decide to figure out if they're right or not. If they're right, you've lost nothing. You know, a couple of days. You know, what have you lost? But what if they're right? And I'll leave it at that.
Boom. Okay, what a way to finish the podcast. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope this was as mind expanding and mind boggling as it was for me. And I hope it was for you as well. And I will see you in the next episode. Ciao.
Take care, man.